know, there's hundreds of things that your car doesn't actually need for it to be a car. In fact, you've probably broken some part of your vehicle before that had nothing to do with your car actually moving down the road. The fact is, you don't have to have air conditioning or a radio or a sunroof or even a roof at all. You don't have to have floor mats or a glove box or even a dashboard. And you don't have to have hubcaps or a spare tire or even a trunk for it to be a car. Those things all make the experience of driving a car much nicer, but they're non-essentials. They aren't necessary things to making it an automobile. If you have a chassis or a frame, an engine, a transmission, axles, wheels, a steering mechanism, and fuel, you have a car. At least a basic one. You don't need remote start and heated seats to have a car. Now, in modern times, obviously many people place as much importance, or maybe even more importance, on the things a vehicle doesn't really need than they do on what it actually has to have. Cars have been developed to such an extent that the unnecessary things potentially take precedence over the necessary things. That's not just true about cars, it's also true about Christianity. Modern Christianity has all kinds of bells and whistles and gizmos, theories, practices, methodologies. Christian bookstores are filled with literature on topics that aren't essential to being a believer in the first place. We've come a long way from the Model T. Now, don't get me wrong, some of the extras are really cool. Some are extremely helpful and practical, but that doesn't make them necessary to our faith. In this series, we're going to look at the necessary things we must believe to be Christians. And without these, we no longer have Christianity. We don't have a vehicle to add a radio or an air conditioner to. Without these basic doctrines, sometimes called fundamentals of the faith, we don't have the gospel Jesus lived out during his time on earth. Paul told the church at Galatia to be careful because there were some false teachers around who wanted to pervert or change the gospel of Christ. And then he gave a special warning. He said this, "But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you than that we have preached unto you, let him be accursed." That's pretty strong stuff right there. In church history, there have been times when a clear call has been made to go back to the basics. At times, there have been creeds that have been formulated, like the Apostles' Creed and the Nicene Creed, to state what was fundamentally necessary to the faith. During the time of the Reformation, a group of 5 solas were stated. Sola Scriptura, by Scripture alone. Sola Fide, by faith alone. Sola Gratia, by grace alone. Solo Christo, through Christ alone. And Soli Deo Gloria, gloria to God alone. In 1996, a professor at Lehigh University wrote a book that has been a source of contention for evolutionists. It's called Darwin's Black Box. The author is Michael Behe. It's a pretty deep book, but I took the time once to read it and discovered a term that has really stuck with me. He called it irreducible complexity. It means that there is a machine or system that can't have any parts missing. And if it's missing a part, it stops working. Behe's famous example was the mousetrap. He defined 5 parts on the mousetrap. There's the platform or foundation. There's the hammer right here, or the spring that makes it snap, the hold down bar, and then the catch. And here's what he theorized about the mousetrap. It can't work without all 5 parts unless there's a comparable replacement offered for one of the parts, or unless there's some significant restructuring. Behe's word picture pointed toward intelligent design for the universe, showing that many material parts of our world and of our beings could never have evolved. They needed all of their parts working at once to exist in the first place. I think we can use the same word picture, since it's such a good one, to show that the gospel has to have all of its parts to work properly. You can't take any of the parts out, or you no longer have the gospel. And so the Christian faith has some necessary things. Now, you may have already seen on the cover of your booklet that Necessary Things is the title of our series. In this first section, we're going to cover a history lesson from the book of Acts that shows the importance of necessary things. And then in the coming weeks, we'll get into the 5 necessary parts of our faith: the deity of Christ, the sacrificial death of Christ, the bodily resurrection of Christ, the second coming of Christ, and the inspiration of the Scriptures. In week 3, we have a special event planned. Your entire group can attend the evening service together at church, where I'll teach through section 3, and then we'll observe the Lord's Supper and remember what Jesus has done for us on the cross. Afterward, you can find a room here at the church property to get together for a few minutes to cover the questions for that session. So keep that in mind for April 14th. Now, as you get into the introduction during the session, I hope you'll take the time to connect with the scriptures that are provided and then answer the discussion questions at the end. We'll see you next week for session 2.